Idaho Territory, late February 1884. The Bitterroot Range had the look of a sleeping leviathan. Snow-humped spines, black furs like scales, wind sawing at the ridgelines until everything sang. Sawyer Vale had learned to tell storm sounds from danger sounds. But the note that knifed through the squall wasn't wind, wasn't willow, wasn't any animal he knew. It was thin and high, then another right behind it, then a third. Each cry staggered like a broken echo. He reined in on the shoulder of a drift, breath fogging the scarf across his face, and tilted his head. Not one. 3. He swung down, boots vanishing shin deep, hand on his mare's bridle to steady her as the gusts shoved at them. The path through the tamarack hadn't seen a hoof in days. It cut the slope like an old scar, iced over, treacherous. He followed the sound anyway. The timber opened onto a stunted meadow, split by a half-collapsed survey line. At the center stood a weather-gray post, braced with iron strap, some long-forgotten marker. Someone had lashed a woman to it with rawhide and wire. Her arms were wrenched back. Her cheek wore the sick bloom of a fresh bruise. Snow had salted her hair and stuck to her lashes, turning each blink into a small battle. At her boots lay 3 tight bundles, wailing in terrible, stubborn turns. Sawyer's pulse kicked once, then settled into the flat calm that came on hunts and bad days. He went to one knee. The woman's lips were split, the blood already dark in the cold. Her eyes tried to focus and failed. They said the mountain could decide, she rasped, voice barely there. It hasn't. Neither have I, Sawyer said. He slid a knife beneath the wire, careful to turn the edge away from her skin. The metal had bitten deep into her forearms. When it sprang, it left angry grooves that welled red and froze at once. She slumped, and he caught her, feeling the dead weight of exhaustion more than body. He cut the rawhide next, then shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The next gust hit hard enough to shift the cornice above the meadow. Snow whispered, then roared. A heavy slide somewhere upslope. Not here, not yet. He moved fast. The smallest bundle was nearly silent now. Bad. He tucked that child inside his shirt against his own heat, cinched with a wool scarf. The other 2 he swaddled tighter with a saddle blanket, tucked under one arm. The woman, God help her. He hoisted across his shoulders fireman style, the coat falling to shield her face. Easy, he told the mare, though he was speaking to all 5 of them. The climb back toward the tree line was a maze of crust and hidden holes. Twice his boot punched through, twice he lunged forward to keep the weight high and moving. A wolf called somewhere beyond the ridge. One note, curious, then a second answering farther off. He didn't have spare bullets for curiosities. He had a line shack a quarter-mile north, half buried but tight against the wind. His own cabin lay beyond that. Too far in this weather. He angled for the shack. Halfway there, the creek cut the path. Black water under glass. The snow bridge section groaned when he stepped on it, and the ice flexed like a held breath. He shifted the babies higher, redistributed weight, and took short, quick steps. One crack spidered at his heel. The mare danced and leapt clean. Sawyer landed and didn't look back. The shack took the storm on its nose. He shouldered the door and stumbled inside to wood that smelled of smoke ghosts and mouse hay. The room was a single square. Hearth, plank bunk, rusted hook with an old kettle. He kicked the door closed as the wind tried to eat it. Then he set the world down in the order that would keep it. Babies first. He lined a crate with his spare blanket and the mare's saddle pad, nested the 2 bundled ones together, then pulled the smallest from his shirt. Skin too cold, lips too pale, but the eyes fluttered. He grabbed the kettle, smashed it into shape against the jam, and filled it with snow. Heat. He needed heat steady, and now He coaxed the old hearth with pine splinters and breath until flame took. He found 2 fist-sized rocks by the threshold, pushed them into the coals, then wrapped them in cloth to slip under the crate's lining. Poor man's warmers. The smallest child made a sound like a bird catching its breath. Good. Only then did he drag the woman, light as a scarecrow, heavier than sin, onto the bunk. He peeled the wire print from her wrists with wet cloth and patience. "Name?" he asked, because people lost to cold sometimes needed to hear themselves anchored. She worked her jaw, swallowed, found him with her eyes. "Annika Dorn. Vale," he answered. "Sawyer Vale." He lifted a tin cup to her lips. Meltwater trembled there, and so did his hand, at last. Outside, the wolves fell quiet. The mountain listened. Inside, the baby's cries faded to hiccups. Sawyer stoked the fire, set the kettle again, and did not ask who had decided a survey post could stand in for a gallows. That story could wait. Breathing could not. "Annika," he said, plain as a promise. "You're not left out here, not while I'm standing." By dawn, the storm had lost its fury, trading violence for silence. Snow sat thick on the roof of the line shack, bowing the beams until each gust made the walls groan like something alive. Inside, Sawyer Vale fed the fire again with the discipline of a man who'd done it all his life. Split kindling, blow on embers, wait for the small blue flames to bloom into gold. Annika Dorn slept in fits, the color only half returned to her cheeks. Her wrists were swaddled in torn linen from his undershirt, her pulse faint but steady. "Every few minutes," she murmured. Fragments of words, names, apologies. He couldn't tell whether she was dreaming or remembering. The babies were quieter now, their breathing small but strong. Sawyer had found 3 tin cups in the cupboard and warmed milk in them one by one, spooning tiny sips into each mouth. They drank like fighters, all instinct and will. When they slept, he sat back on the floorboards, letting the heat touch his face and his nerves finally unwind. He hadn't meant to find anyone that morning. He'd been headed to the upper traps, mink, maybe fox, before the thaw ruined the fur. That was his plan. Keep busy, keep alone. That plan had frozen out there in the snow beside the fence post. A sound broke his thoughts. A rustle, a soft groan. Annika's eyes fluttered open, confusion swimming there like something surfacing from a deep lake. She tried to sit, winced, then blinked at the 3 bundled shapes by the fire. For a long moment, she just stared. Then the recognition hit her, and her breath came out as a broken sob. "They're alive?" Sawyer nodded once. All 3. She reached a trembling hand toward them, not daring to touch, like she was afraid they'd vanish. She tried again, voice raw. "He said the snow would decide. Said, if the mountain kept us, it meant God wanted us gone." Sawyer didn't answer. There was no fixing a sentence like that. He just poured warm water into a tin cup, handed it to her, and said quietly, "God didn't get the vote this time." She tried to smile. It collapsed halfway. "You don't know what you brought into your house? I reckon I'll learn," he said simply. Her eyes flicked toward the door. "They'll come. Men who do what he says. They always come." "Then I'll be ready," Sawyer replied, the words even, not loud. He checked the rifle leaning against the wall. Old Henry lever action, cleaned so often the bluing had worn thin. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he'd seen enough of men like her husband to know what kind of cruelty hid behind respectability. Annika sipped, the tremor in her hand easing as warmth returned. Her gaze drifted to him again, studying the man who had dragged her out of the snow. "You live here alone?" "Since my brother passed," Sawyer said. "Company's been thin." She nodded, eyes lowering. You didn't ask who I was. He stirred the fire, adding another log. Figured you'd tell me when you wanted to. That answer seemed to steady her. She wrapped the blanket tighter and whispered, Annika Dorn. I was married to Luther Dorn. He owns most of the timberland south of Meridian Creek. Or did. I suppose he still does. When our third child came, another girl, he said my womb had betrayed him. Her voice cracked then, but she kept talking, as if stopping would make it worse. He said no man should be cursed with daughters. He told me to pray for forgiveness. Then he sent his brother and 2 ranch hands to teach me what defiance cost. Sawyer sat still, his face unreadable but the muscle in his jaw working. I begged them to leave the babies, she said softly. They laughed. Said he wanted the mountain to do what he couldn't. Her eyes shone with the kind of tears that don't fall easily. I would have died out there, if not for you. Sawyer didn't offer comfort. He just nodded once, a gesture that carried the weight of respect rather than pity. Drink that, he said. Then rest. The snow will bury our tracks soon enough. Annika looked toward the window. Frost-rimmed, the glass trembling under wind. And if they find us, then they'll find the wrong shack, he said, and maybe a man who doesn't scare easy. The fire popped, throwing sparks against the iron pot. Outside, the morning light crept across the ridge, pale and merciless. But in that cabin, warmth began to creep into the corners. Not comfort yet, but something that remembered how to be. Sawyer turned back to the cradle, checking the smallest child. The girl's fingers flexed weakly against the wool. He touched her wrist with the back of his hand, testing for heat. Tough little thing, he murmured. Annika watched him, silent. There was a steadiness in the way he moved. No panic, no pity, just purpose. And that steadiness was the first thing since the snowstorm that made her believe they might actually live. The wind eased, then stopped altogether. The world outside went still, the way it sometimes did right before another storm. Sawyer looked toward the door, brow furrowed. Stay here, he said quietly, taking up the rifle. He eased the door open an inch. The air that poured in was bitter and silent. Too silent. Not even the crows were calling. His eyes swept the trees. Nothing. Then, faint and distant, a sound, metal on rock, a rider's spur, maybe 2. He closed the door softly and turned back to her. They're on the trail, he said. Annika's breath hitched. Already? Sawyer nodded, pulling his coat from the peg. Rest while you can. You'll need it when the time comes. And as he stepped back into the cold to check the slope above the shack, the sound of hoofbeats rolled faintly through the valley. The kind of sound that meant the past wasn't finished yet. Snow turned to sleet by mid-afternoon, a cold rain that hit the cabin roof like drumming fingers. Sawyer Vale stood by the narrow window slit, watching the gray blur beyond the pines. The storm had softened enough for men to ride through it. That was what worried him. He'd built fires before in weather worse than this, had outlasted wolves and blizzards. But what trailed Annika Dorn wasn't the kind of threat that tired easy. It was the kind that believed it owned her. Inside, Annika sat near the fire with her back straight, the 3 infants swaddled in a crate beside her. She had washed her face, bound her hair, and borrowed one of Sawyer's old shirts over her nightdress. The bruises along her neck had started to fade from purple to yellow. Her eyes hadn't softened, though. They had the sharp, alert look of someone who'd stopped trusting sleep. Sawyer loaded the rifle with slow, measured motions. If they make it up the lower ridge, we'll hear them before we see them, he said. You think they'll find this place? He didn't answer right away. They'll try. She said nothing after that. But her hand moved to rest lightly over the babies, as if her touch alone could form a wall around them. By evening, the rain froze again. The sky cleared just enough to let the light fall blue on the snowpack outside. That's when Sawyer saw it, a flicker through the trees, where no fire should have been. Small, controlled, a camp. He stepped back from the window. They're here, Annika's breath caught. How many? 3, maybe 4. Close enough to smell the smoke from our chimney if the wind shifts. Fear rippled through her, but she swallowed it down. What will you do? What I have to. She looked up at him then, eyes wide and unblinking. You don't owe me this. He cinched his coat collar. No, but that never mattered. He left her with the rifle and took the revolver for himself. The forest swallowed him whole, the kind of blackness that only mountains in winter can make. His boots left shallow impressions in the crusted snow, gone in seconds as flakes drifted down. At the ridge edge, he crouched low behind a boulder. Below, 3 riders had pitched camp where the trail widened near the creek. Their horses steamed. One man sat by the fire, sharpening a knife with slow strokes. Another stood guard, scanning the slope. The third had his back turned, but the posture, stiff, upright, entitled, told Sawyer all he needed to know. Luther Dorn. He recognized the way the man held stillness like a weapon. Sawyer listened. Told you she couldn't have gotten far. One of the hired men muttered. She's here somewhere. Dorn replied, his voice precise, practiced. The mountain doesn't keep secrets from me. Vale's shack isn't on any map, but I've heard of him. A trapper. Reclusive. If he's found her, she's mine again by law. Sawyer felt his jaw tighten. By law. The kind of phrase men like Dorn used to chain people long after they'd been freed. He slid back up the ridge and returned to the cabin by another route. Silent as falling ash. When he pushed through the door, Annika was standing, holding the rifle at the ready. They're camped by the creek, he said. Dorn's with them. Her face went white. You saw him? Close enough. He poured what was left of the hot water into the tin cup and set it beside her. We can't wait for dawn. The tracks will hold through the night. We move west, across the frozen wash. There's a mine shaft near Iron Ridge, one the timbermen abandoned last fall. We can hole up there. Hole up. You think we can make it with the babies? He looked down at the sleeping bundles, their faces turned toward the firelight. We'll have to. She hesitated, then nodded once. All right. They left just after moonrise. The forest had gone utterly still. No wind, no sound. The kind of quiet that felt too deliberate. Sawyer led the way, horse in tow, Annika walking behind with one child strapped to her chest, and the other 2 bound close against her sides with blankets and rope. The ice field ahead gleamed faintly under the moon. A wide stretch of frozen creek bed, treacherous in places. They crossed slow, testing each step. Halfway through, the wind shifted, and from behind came the unmistakable echo of a man's shout. Tracks! Dorn's men had found them. Sawyer grabbed Annika's arm, whispering, Run, stay low. Gunfire cracked, sharp in the frozen air. Bullets shattered branches above their heads. The mare reared, panicked, and bolted into the dark. Sawyer fired once back toward the noise, not to hit, just to buy time. They made it to the opposite bank, stumbling into the timberline. Annika tripped, catching herself before she fell over the child at her chest. Sawyer pulled her upright. Keep going, he hissed. The ridge is close. Behind them, more shots. The echo rolled through the canyon. By the time they reached the mine entrance, a black hole in the side of the slope, half hidden by drifts. Their breaths were ragged, their hands shaking. Sawyer ducked inside first, found the lantern he'd stashed months ago, and sparked it to life. The dim glow revealed old timber supports and a half-collapsed tunnel stretching deeper into the mountain. He motioned for her to follow. Stay back from the mouth. They'll look for prints. Annika sank to her knees, clutching the babies, trying to quiet their cries. "They won't stop," she whispered. Sawyer knelt beside her. "Then neither will we." He took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders, ignoring the sting of the cold that rushed in through the cave mouth. Outside, the hoofbeats drew nearer, then paused. Voices, then silence. The storm began again. Sudden, furious, white. The sound of it filled the mountain like a living thing. Sawyer met Annika's eyes in the lantern glow. "The mountain's on our side tonight," he said. She nodded faintly, her breath visible in the chill. "Then maybe," she whispered. "It's finally decided." And somewhere outside, the wind buried their tracks once more, sweeping away every mark of where they'd been, as if the mountain itself had chosen to keep their secret. Morning came late and gray, the kind of light that turned snow into iron. The storm had spent itself during the night, but its silence afterward was heavier than before. Sawyer Vale stood at the mouth of the abandoned mine, watching the trees below. No movement, no sound, just a landscape too still to trust. Behind him, the lantern burned low. Annika sat near it, the babies wrapped in layers of wool and fur. Their tiny breaths fogged the air. Her eyes had the hollow look of someone who'd gone through fear, past panic, and reached the thin edge of exhaustion. "Do you think they're gone?" she asked quietly. Sawyer shook his head. "No, just waiting for daylight." He'd seen men like Dorn before, patient when they thought power was on their side. The type that treated cruelty like ownership, cruelty that could pass as law if spoken with enough money behind it. He checked his revolver again, 6 rounds clean and ready. 1 for each man, if it came to that. He wasn't a man who looked for violence, but he'd long since learned that peace sometimes required a fight to earn it. Annika shifted, brushing a hand across the nearest bundle. "If you stay here with us, you'll die for me," she said. Sawyer turned. "If I leave you, I'll die anyway." That stopped her words cold. She blinked, then looked away. By mid-morning, the first hoofbeats came. Slow, careful. 4 riders. Sawyer could hear the jingle of bits, the low murmur of men trying not to be heard. He motioned for Annika to move deeper into the mine. She gathered the infants and slipped into the tunnel's shadows. Sawyer stepped outside, rifle in hand, body still as stone. The riders broke through the trees. Luther Dorn was easy to spot. Fine coat, posture straight, arrogance worn like armor. His men flanked him. 2 hired guns and 1 drifter who looked half-starved, but mean enough to bite if told to. "Vale," Dorn called out, voice cutting across the snow. "You've got something that belongs to me." Sawyer stayed silent. Dorn smirked, mist from his breath curling in front of his face. "You can hand her over, or I'll take her off your corpse. I don't care which." "Then you better start caring," Sawyer said evenly, "because you won't leave this mountain with what you came for." Dorn laughed once, short, sharp. "You think you can stop me? You're a hunter, Vale, not a lawman. The law says she's my wife." Sawyer's gaze didn't waver. "Then your law's broken." Dorn's smirk faltered. He flicked his hand, and one of the hired men spurred forward, raising his rifle. The shot cracked, splintering bark near Sawyer's shoulder. Snow puffed up like dust. Sawyer dropped to one knee and fired once. The bullet hit the man's horse's bridle, sending it rearing. The rider tumbled backward, hit hard, and didn't move. The other 2 froze, not out of fear but calculation. Dorn's voice barked again, louder. "Finish it!" Before they could, a second shot rang from the ridge behind Dorn. Clean, precise. One of his men jerked sideways and fell. Dorn turned, startled, just as a shout echoed. "Sheriff on the ridge." From the slope above, 4 figures appeared. Sheriff McCready and his deputies, rifles drawn. Hattie was with them, wrapped in her green shawl, a revolver steady in her hands. Sawyer exhaled through his nose. He'd sent Hattie word through a messenger 2 days before the storm, just in case. He hadn't known if it reached her. Apparently it had. Dorn went pale. "This is my land," he snarled. The sheriff's voice was iron. "Not anymore. You left a woman for dead. You're under arrest for attempted murder and unlawful confinement. You'll hang for this," Dorn spat. "Not before you do," Sawyer replied. Dorn tried to draw, fast, but not fast enough. McCready's rifle fired once. The gun spun from Dorn's hand, his coat sleeve torn by the bullet. He screamed, clutching his arm, as the deputies closed in. When the smoke cleared, Sawyer lowered his rifle. Hattie met his eyes across the snow, gave a small nod, and began leading the deputies and prisoners down the slope. Dorn's protests faded with distance, swallowed by the same mountain that had once been his gallows. Hours later, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The snow glittered like crushed glass. Sawyer returned to the mine and found Annika standing near the entrance, one hand shading her eyes, the babies bundled close. "It's done," he said simply. She didn't ask for details. Her gaze softened, wary relief, the kind that trembles on its way to belief. "You risked everything for us," she whispered. He shrugged. "Didn't have much left worth keeping until you showed up." Her lips parted. Not quite a smile, but close. "You saved my daughters. You saved me." Sawyer leaned his rifle against the wall. Then maybe the mountain decided right after all. By spring, the snow melted from the ridges, leaving green shoots curling through the thaw. Sawyer rebuilt the mine shack into something larger, windows cut for sunlight, a roof that didn't groan under the wind. Annika stayed, at first because she had nowhere else to go, then because leaving never seemed to cross her mind again. He built cradles for the girls out of cedar. She taught him to soften his voice when they cried. In the evenings, she'd read from a weathered Bible she'd salvaged from Dorn's abandoned house. Not for the words, but for the peace they seemed to bring her. By summer, travelers passing through the valley began stopping by for food, shelter, and stories. Word spread of a place called Hearth Hollow, where a quiet man and a woman with 3 daughters welcomed anyone who'd lost their way. And sometimes, when the night wind hummed through the pines, Annika would pause by the door, listen and whisper to Sawyer, "You hear that? The mountain still remembers." He'd look up from the fire, smile faintly, and say, "Good." So it never forgets what mercy sounds like. Outside, the wind moved through the timber in long, low breaths, not cruel this time, but kind. As if the mountain, for once, agreed. Summer returned to the Bitterroot Range like an apology, warm, slow, and golden. The mountain that once buried everything in silence now bloomed with wildflowers. Sawyer Vale stood at the edge of the clearing where it had all begun, the same place he'd found Annika half dead in the snow months before. But this time, the post was gone, the wire burned, and in its place stood a young oak tree, its roots gripping the earth where cruelty once stood. Annika had planted it herself. "A tree grows," she'd said, "because no one tells it can't." The babies, no longer babies now, sat on a blanket near the porch, their laughter echoing off the pines. Eloise tried to stand on wobbly legs, while Ruth and June crawled after a stray chicken with determined squeals. Sawyer watched them from the steps, a soft disbelief still etched in his quiet face. Annika appeared in the doorway, hair loose and eyes bright from the sun. "They're walking before you even taught them to fish," she teased. "Guess they don't need my help with everything," he said. She smiled. "That's how you know they'll be fine." Inside, the cabin had changed. The walls were scrubbed and whitewashed, herbs hung from the rafters, and a new hearth stood in the center. Built from stone they'd gathered together. A carved sign above it read, "Hearth Hollow," painted in steady, careful letters. Travelers came through often now, hunters, widows, and drifters, all drawn by rumors of a small place in the mountains where kindness lived. One afternoon, a rider from town brought a letter. The sheriff had written it himself. Luther Dorn was tried, convicted, and sent east for his crimes. "Justice served," the note said simply. "May your ridge stay quiet." Annika read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in the Bible on the mantel. Not as a trophy, but as a closure. That night, the fire burned steady while rain whispered across the roof. Sawyer sat carving a piece of wood, his hands sure and patient. When he was done, he held it out, a small carving of a mountain, roots and branches curling together like a heart. "For you," he said, "for what you grew out of nothing." Annika ran her thumb along the grain, tracing the pattern. "For what we grew," she corrected gently. He looked up then, met her eyes, and for the first time since winter, truly smiled. Not the polite kind, not the cautious one. A full, quiet smile that said he finally believed in the life they'd built. Outside, lightning flickered far across the valley. The three girls stirred in their sleep, one of them mumbling a word that sounded a little like home. Annika leaned her head against Sawyer's shoulder. "Funny," she murmured, "how the mountain that tried to take everything ended up giving it back." He nodded. "Guess mercy isn't something you wait for. It's something you make, one fire, one act, one day at a time." The storm passed before midnight, leaving the air cool and clean. The oak in the clearing swayed gently under the moonlight, its young leaves shimmering silver. And in the cabin below it, laughter, quiet, unforced, and alive, spilled out through the cracks of the old wooden walls, rising like a hymn into the mountain air. They say the mountains remember everything, the storms, the silence, the cries carried by the wind. But sometimes, they remember the good, too. A man who chose compassion over comfort, a woman who found courage where fear had lived, and three small hearts that proved love can begin even in the coldest places. Because mercy, once planted, doesn't vanish. It roots deep. It survives the frost. And when spring comes, as it always does, it blooms again, stronger than before.